Netanyahu sat in silence as reports flowed across his desk, but his silence was not born from fear, it was born from arrogance, the deep conviction that no young African leader could truly challenge his authority on the global stage. Ibrahim Traoré's warnings had been sent again and again, sharp and direct, words stripped of diplomacy, but each time Netanyahu brushed them aside with a dismissive hand. To him, Traoré was loud but powerless, a rising soldier who would eventually crash against the wall of real politics. His advisors urged him to pay attention, showing clips of massive rallies in Burkina Faso, millions chanting for sovereignty, flames of resistance spreading through Mali and Niger, yet Netanyahu's face remained unmoved. He believed he had seen this before, small states roaring only to collapse under pressure, and he was convinced this would be no different. But each warning Traoré sent was not a cry for attention, it was a calculated strike, a countdown disguised as words, and Netanyahu failed to hear the ticking clock. When Traoré spoke, he spoke with the weight of his people, the authority of a generation rising, the courage of a continent tired of submission, yet in Netanyahu's eyes, these were empty theatrics. He leaned back in his chair, telling himself that alliances, wealth, and decades of experience placed him far above the reach of a soldier who had only recently seized power. His mistake was not ignorance of facts, but blindness to the shift of tides, the inability to see that Africa was no longer a collection of weak voices, it was becoming a storm. Netanyahu ignored the reports that Traoré was cutting foreign influence piece by piece, reclaiming mines, dismantling old bases, and forging unity across borders once divided by colonial hands. He underestimated the fire that had already begun burning under the surface. His intelligence teams flagged the warnings as aggressive rhetoric, but Netanyahu shrugged, his focus locked on other crises, convinced that West Africa was peripheral, a distraction, a shadow in the grand chessboard of geopolitics. Yet shadows have a way of growing, and the shadow of Traoré was already stretching across the region, reaching places Netanyahu thought were secure. Every ignored warning gave Traoré more space to maneuver. Every dismissal fueled his narrative that global powers would never respect Africa until Africa stood on its own feet. Netanyahu could not see that his silence was not strength, it was gasoline on a fire already raging. The people of West Africa saw those warnings not as hollow threats, but as promises of defiance, and Netanyahu's refusal to respond confirmed everything Traoré claimed about the arrogance of external powers. In his pride, Netanyahu strengthened the very force he hoped would fade. He had the chance to recalibrate, to take Traoré seriously, to engage before the storm, but his instincts told him to wait it out, to let the noise pass. What he failed to see was that the noise had become thunder, and thunder only comes when lightning is about to strike. He sat with his advisors discussing security, trade, and diplomacy in other regions, while in Ouagadougou a young captain was laying the foundation of something that would shake the world. Netanyahu's danger was not that Traoré threatened him directly, it was that Traoré was rewriting the script of global power, and Netanyahu didn't bother to read the first page. Every moment he ignored those messages, Traoré's voice grew louder across the continent. Leaders once cautious began echoing his words, citizens once afraid began demanding change, and a narrative began crystallizing: Africa could stand without the EU, without Israel, without NATO. Netanyahu's refusal to acknowledge him didn't silence Traoré, it amplified him. What was meant to be brushed away became a symbol, and that symbol carried more weight than Netanyahu's decades of negotiations. He believed he was protecting his position by refusing to respond, but he was actually confirming his weakness, showing the world that he feared nothing from a young soldier, when in reality, that soldier was preparing a move that would make his silence look like surrender. Traoré's warnings were precise, clear, and final. He told Netanyahu what was coming. He gave him the chance to respond, but Netanyahu's pride refused. He thought time was his ally, that patience would expose Traoré as another fleeting figure of rebellion. But time was not on his side. Each day brought Traoré closer to alliances no one imagined, closer to a defense pact that would push Israel and the EU out of positions they had quietly held for years. Netanyahu's dismissal wasn't just arrogance, it was strategic blindness. He believed his decades in politics made him immune to surprise, yet the surprise was already building beneath him. Netanyahu ignored Traoré because he believed Africa would always be fragmented, that no young leader could unite it, that warnings from Ouagadougou carried no weight in Tel Aviv. But history is written by those who dare to break the pattern, and Traoré was not speaking as one man, he was speaking as the voice of a continent that had suffered for centuries. Netanyahu heard the words but not the meaning, he saw the man but not the movement, he dismissed the threat but missed the revolution rising in plain sight. Warnings from Traoré were not diplomatic notes, they were declarations of intent. They were not meant to be negotiated, they were meant to be obeyed or faced. Netanyahu ignored them, and in ignoring them, he walked straight into the danger he believed could never reach him.